sleeping last night, so you probably all woke up even though you stayed out late last night. The scariest costume I saw someone dressed up as Janet Yellen. She got a lot of candy by threatening QE forever. So I know a lot of you had to overcome a lot of geographical inconvenience to be here. So you probably may not have heard that the Treasury Department announced that the USD will now be backed by gold again, probably due to the competition with currencies like Bitcoin. And they stated that the last 100 years was just a silly joke, and they would have told us sooner, but the depressions and all the messy wars made the timing inconvenient. But seriously, thanks for coming. We can't have this conference without you. We have a lot of great speakers planned. We have food in the other room and booths in the other room, so if you don't want to stay for all the speakers, you can go to the other room. You can talk and socialize, network. And so stick around. I hope you enjoy the conference. I'll introduce Rodrigo. He's the president of the club. He's going to have a few words to say.
Hi everyone. So I'd just like to give a few announcements and a quick introduction. We are the Purdue Bitcoin Club. We have set up this organization to increase awareness of Bitcoin and get more people into the network, make it grow, and get businesses on board. We also have coding seminars, and in the future we'll have Bitcoin job fairs and possibly hackathons. So I think it's a great opportunity for you to get involved. We're just getting started. So this is just our first event, and we got to put together pretty fast. We exist as an organization for just 2 months or about that. So there's still a lot of room for interesting things to be made here. Also, I would like to say that we are part of CCN. They are a bigger organization that connects a lot of colleges around the US and the world. And if somebody here is coming from other schools and they don't have a Bitcoin club, you are welcome to contact me and I can help you with that, or you can contact CCN. It's a great network to be connected to, because they know a lot of people and speakers and organize this kind of event. They are our main sponsor for today. For the event today, we were thinking that we might have less speakers, but then we got the rich man's problem. We have a lot of speakers, so in the end, we don't have a lot of time between the talks, unfortunately, but you are welcome to come and go, have some food in the other room, talk to people that have brought materials from their companies, talk to miners, and just get to network with them. I realize that a lot of people are very knowledgeable about Bitcoin, but it's also an event to introduce people to it. So if you're new to it and never heard about it, I just want to tell you about what it is. So it's basically just digital currency, which is completely decentralized. It's like sharing music on a peer-to-peer network. Instead of many files, you have just one. It's the ledger of your transactions. And there are many great things about this. You just rely on cryptography. You don't rely on any authority for control of your money. And you can move the money any place in the world, anytime you like. So it's a trustless system, and it's not just for money. You can use it for other things. We have storage people here today. They are a great example of an application of the blockchain technology that's not currency. It's for decentralized Dropbox, but I won't go much into what they are doing. I will leave that opportunity for them. Okay. Our next speaker now is Professor Cathy Zhang, and she's a professor of economics at Purdue University, and her research interests are in macroeconomics, monetary economics, and international economics. Her current work examines the emergence of an international currency and the role of monetary policy and currency competition, the adoption of new forms of electronic payments, and its impact on monetary transactions. Please welcome Dr. Cathy Zhang. there no microphone? Okay.
I'll
That's
just
fine.
So it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Rodrigo, for organizing everything. So I'm the faculty advisor for the Bitcoin Club, and Rodrigo always impresses me every week when he manages to come up with these things almost on the fly. So my talk today, most people in this room are probably more knowledgeable about Bitcoin than I am, but what I want to do is give my perspective on Bitcoin from a kind of an academic perspective. So my research is in macroeconomics and payment systems more broadly. And so what I want to talk about today is how I think about Bitcoin and through the lens of monetary theory. So so a couple of things I want to talk about. First of all, in order to understand what Bitcoin is in terms of monetary theory, I want to talk a little bit about what money's social role is. Now, I guess just from our Econ 101 knowledge, we typically think of money as capturing these three different roles: as a store of value, as a medium of exchange, and a unit of account. But I'm going to argue that money's technological role is a bit more subtle. And so that understanding this role kind of helps us understand what role Bitcoin is playing in the monetary system. And then I want to talk about, I guess, again through the lens of monetary theory, is Bitcoin a bubble? And how can we think of Bitcoin in terms of recent financial events? And finally, I want to give some thoughts about I guess, the implications of Bitcoin for the future of central banking. Because like Rodrigo was saying earlier, this notion of currency competition is pretty important for us to consider, especially when now Bitcoin is an alternative means of payment to more traditional objects. So my research is really about money and liquidity. And so the way I think about money, well, to be more precise, the way I think about fiat money, which is an intrinsically worthless object, it's going to be something that helps facilitate trade. Now, the mother of all asset pricing puzzles in monetary economics is basically the existence of fiat money. So the puzzle is fiat money is an intrinsically useless object. It doesn't give you consumption value, and it can't be used for production. Now, the puzzle is, given that it's intrinsically worthless, how can it possibly be valued in exchange? So this kind of was a puzzle for monetary theorists, say 30 years ago. Couldn't really explain why something like fiat money could be valued. Now, the big idea that's kind of been developing in the past 25 years or so has been, well, fiat money, even though it's intrinsically worthless, it does serve a social role by helping facilitate trade both across time, as a store of value, and also across individuals, a medium of exchange. So money is going to be socially useful because it's going to be valued for its liquidity. Liquidity in monetary economics is just going to be the ease at which trade occurs. So money is going to serve a big social role here. And this is the social role that money is going to play in the economy. Now, kind of a bit more subtle, and this is where I think my research is not merely about just monetary economics, but it's also getting quite philosophical as well. Now the question is, what kind of social role or what technological role is money playing? So I guess to answer this question, it helps to go back into the history of thought. So there's a primitive idea that money is going to be an imperfect substitute for record keeping. So if you think about an economy, say without money, a very primitive economy, and people, say, live in close quarters, they trust each other. And so there's going to be at least some kind of communal record keeping within this primitive economy. So in those type of economies where people trust each other, people kind of know each other's trading histories, there's not going to be any role for money, really. Because instead of money, what you can do is promise your trading partner that you'll repay in the future. So given that there's trust, given that there's enough enforcement, given that there's perfect commitment, you don't really need money. Credit can always do better. The idea is that in reality, there's limited commitment, there's limited enforcement, and there's limited record keeping. In these types of environment, which I think is a more realistic description about how economies actually behave, money is going to play a really critical role. It's going to help facilitate trade when credit is not possible. So this is the big idea behind this beautiful paper by Narayana Kocherlakota called Money as Memory. And this is the idea that money is going to be an imperfect substitute for credit. And this is really important when economies have various frictions, such as limited commitment and limited enforcement. So the use of money as a medium of exchange, it's not going to require trust. It's not going to require commitment or enforcement. Because if you think about money, it's kind of like it allows trade to occur between anonymous individuals. Credit is very different. Credit, you need some kind of trust in order to keep track of people's past behaviors. If you can't record people's trading histories, you're not going to lend money to them in the future. So money helps bypass this, lack of commitment and lack of enforcement. So I'm going to argue that money's social role is going to be information. Money's going to be a form of it's going to be a way of summarizing information without any kind of explicit record-keeping technology. So then where does Bitcoin fit in? So now, I think Bitcoin is really interesting to study, and it's a kind of nice case study because it's probably the purest example of a fiat currency that I know of. So even unlike US dollars, so I tell my students typically that you can think of fiat money or the dollar bills you have in your wallet as intrinsically worthless. You value it not because you like holding green pieces of paper in your wallet. You value it indirectly for its liquidity role. It helps you trade. It helps you get objects that you actually do want to value, that you do value. So Bitcoin's something similar. It's also intrinsically worthless. So I guess then the question is, what then determines the value of Bitcoin, given that it's kind of like an intrinsically worthless object? Its underlying value isn't really tied to anything fundamental. So this is kind of a puzzle. But I guess if you take it more broadly within the perspective of monetary theory, then it's not so puzzling. So what's really, I guess, what's a key feature of fiat money and what's a key feature of payment systems is that beliefs and expectations about other people is going to play a really critical role. So think about the acceptability of fiat money. So it's only socially valued because in the future someone else is valuing it and is going to accept it in exchange. So if you think that other people are not going to value fiat money in the future, then you're not going to accept it yourself. Like, why would you if you know that you're not able to trade with it in the future? And so this expectation, this anticipation that you will be able to use it in the future, it's going to help pin down money's social role. So Bitcoin's something similar. So Bitcoin, I'm going to argue that its value is fundamentally tied to people's beliefs and expectations of the future. So if you look at the price of Bitcoin over time, all of you guys know that it's incredibly volatile. There's wild swings in the price and the value of Bitcoin. Now again, this is puzzling to some people, but I don't think it's terribly puzzling at all, because what this is saying is that the value of Bitcoin, it's so volatile because there's nothing fundamental pinning down its value. It's going to be purely driven by people's beliefs and expectations of the future. So if you think that Bitcoin's going to be highly valued in the future, this will drive up the price and push up its price for the entire market as well. And similarly, if enough market participants believe that the value of Bitcoin is going to fall in the future, this will be self-fulfilling and cause the price to fall. So Bitcoin essentially is a bubble. Now, Bitcoin as a payment system is also very interesting to study as well. So basically, Bitcoin is a monetary system governed by a computer algorithm. It's a set of rules. It's an institution that creates and manages a supply of digital currency units. and also process payments between anonymous users by crediting and debiting digital accounts. So we can always, we can kind of compare this and contrast this with the current U.S. monetary system. So currently, the U.S. money supply is controlled by the central bank, or the Federal Reserve, and U.S. dollars, unlike Bitcoin, they have legal tender status. Officially, the Federal Reserve says you can settle all debts, public and private, with U.S. dollars. So it's a legal tender. Similarly, I guess along these same lines, bank accounts, they're somehow insured by the FDIC. And so you still have some, outside authorities somehow securing its value. Now, typically, payments are processed either bilaterally, when you're going to a store and exchanging cash for a good with a merchant, or there's some kind of intermediary involved, meaning that if you pay with credit or you pay with your debit card, after you swipe your card, this payment goes through some intermediary or third-party issuer. And these intermediaries are going to serve a critical role. So these intermediaries, they're going to help facilitate trade. They're going to tie together lenders and borrowers. So that's the fundamental role of the financial system, to facilitate trade between lenders and borrowers. But what's critical when you have an intermediary is that it requires some kind of record-keeping technology. Now, Bitcoin is a bit different. Like we were saying, Bitcoin is a virtual currency, doesn't have any intrinsic value, kind of like fiat money. It also has no legal backing. So there's no central authority to manage its supply, kind of what draws a lot of people to it. And there's also no intermediary or no official third party to help process payments. It's a decentralized virtual currency. Now, there's some advantages and drawbacks that I see to this. What are some advantages? Well, it's I think a very democratic form of money. The low-cost banking is available to virtually anyone. Now, it's also true that in practice, some countries regulate or prohibit the use of Bitcoin. But I guess, broadly speaking, it seems that this low-cost version of banking is available to most people. It's also, since its supply is not determined by the central bank or any kind of government institution, its supply is free of political manipulation. Now, this is kind of interesting I think it's interesting because if you think about the U.S. currency, so it's controlled by the central bank, and so implicitly, when the central bank wants to increase or decrease the money supply, they can create inflation, essentially. Bitcoin is a bit different because there's no central bank or no authority that can manipulate its value. So its value is going to be completely determined by what goes on in the market. And like I was saying before, this is going to be driven by beliefs of market participants. Finally, since it's basically a decentralized currency, somehow a private currency, and allows for anonymous payments. So this aspect is very similar to cash. So cash is anonymous in the sense that when you go into the store and pay with it, there's no record of you having transacted with it. This is very different from credit payments and debit payments, where when you make a transaction, your transaction is recorded. Cash allows transactions to be anonymous. And this is also what makes, cash payments very kind of difficult for economists to measure. There's a lot of cash in circulation in official transactions, but there's also tons of cash in circulation for underground transactions. And these transactions are very difficult to measure. So then I guess what are some drawbacks of Bitcoin? Well, it's going to come from its decentralized structure. So its decentralized structure, unfortunately, is going to somehow slow down processing. So if you compare this to credit cards, even though credit card payments, they're very fast. The downside, however, is that the merchant, when it wants to accept a credit card, they have to install some kind of technology to do so. And so it's typically quite costly for merchants to install this. for Bitcoin, it's much cheaper for merchants. It's a relatively low-cost way for them to secure payments, but it's somehow a little bit slower. And I guess the speed difference between credit transaction and Bitcoin is covered by the costs that merchants do have to pay. So the last drawback that I see to Bitcoin is that it's going to lack price stability. And price stability is something that we value in a good currency. So people always ask me, is Bitcoin a good investment? I'm kind of reluctant to give an answer to that. I can give a more confident answer to the question, is Bitcoin a good money? So I know that from just my study of monetary systems and throughout history, a good money is one in which there's somehow price stability. Its value doesn't change too much in the future. US dollar is a good example of this. So we know, we're fairly confident that, if you ask me what the US inflation is going to be, say a month from now, I'm fairly confident to say that it'll hover around 2%. Now, even though its value might change day to day, it's true that it does, if you take a yearly horizon, you can be fairly confident that the value of the US dollar will be roughly, that the US inflation rate will be roughly 2%. Now, it'd be much harder to make the same kind of prediction for Bitcoin. It's much harder to say what its value is going to be, precisely because it fluctuates around so much. So this is one potential drawback that I see to Bitcoin. Now, how big is Bitcoin exactly? Or in the context of US currency or other types of payments that we commonly see, how large is this threat? So currently, there's about 7 billion Bitcoin in circulation. This is a large number, but you also have to keep this within the broader perspective of how many transactions are actually occurring with US dollars. So there's 1.3 trillion US dollars in circulation. Now, about half of this, roughly, is occurring within our country's borders, but also a large share of US transactions is also occurring abroad. So it turns out that about 50%, some say more, so I guess 50% is the lower bound, for the amount of US dollars currently in circulation in other countries. So this is, so most of the US dollars, I guess economists kind of hesitate to say where exactly it is, but we are fairly confident that a lot of it is in developing countries, including some Latin American countries, Eastern European countries, and a lot of this is taking place in underground transactions. And precisely because these are underground transactions, kind of makes it difficult to track. But the bottom line is there's a lot of US dollars in circulation. Much larger than the amount of Bitcoin in circulation. That's not terribly surprising. What about transactions? So per minute, there's about, on average, 40 Bitcoin transactions. I mean, this is also, I think this is pretty significant, but again, taken in a broader perspective, there's about 200,000 Visa transactions per minute, and that's just Visa. There's also other, there's other competitors to Visa, including MasterCard and some other ones. And so even though I guess the scale of Bitcoin is quite large, per transaction, it's still lagging behind some more common payment systems. On average, however, what's kind of interesting, or what I thought was interesting, was per transaction, there's an average of $2,000. So an average Bitcoin transaction is about $2,000, whereas the average Visa transaction is about $80. And so even though the sheer overall quantity of Bitcoin is lagging behind US dollars, at a per transaction level, people are buying larger things with Bitcoin. And we can speculate on what they're using, I guess, Bitcoin to buy. But I guess that's for another day. So I'm going to end by, I guess, positing or giving my thoughts about what we should kind of study or think about next. So I guess my research, as I was saying before, is kind of about monetary systems and moreover about currency competition. Now, there's a long tradition of currency competition across space and time. So across history, there's many, many examples where there's competition between either private monies or even at an international scale, competition between international currencies. So if we think about the current international payment system now, we have the US dollar. This is the kind of the premier example of an international currency. It's going to be a money that's used across country borders for various reasons. Now the US dollar is not the only international currency. There's also now competitors in the euro and now people discussing the Chinese currency as well. So there's currency competition, and this is not unique to this particular point in time. It's going to be common throughout time in history. Now, here's where I think Bitcoin is really interesting to study. Now, Bitcoin seems to be offering some kind of competition, not only with US currency, but also other types of currencies out there. So arguably, my view is that one of the more important aspects of the Bitcoin revolution is the possible threat of entry into the money and payment system. So this has big implications for how I think of monetary system and also the conduct of monetary policy by central banks. So so this threat of entry, this notion of competition, is going to either force traditional institutions to either adapt or perish. And so the advantages that Bitcoin offers, more traditional currencies will have to, or more traditional payment systems, will have to think about a way in order to address these concerns. And so what does this mean for central banking? So I think that's also an open question, but I think that if good central banks or central banks with that have a sound objective shouldn't fear Bitcoin at all. They should welcome Bitcoin as a healthy competitor to more official legal tender. So I guess I'm going to stop here, and I look forward to talking with you and hearing your thoughts on your ideas about, or your thinking of how Bitcoin fits in with the monetary system more broadly.
Would anybody like to ask questions to Dr. Cathy Zhang?
So at the end of the first section, what you said, so Bitcoin is a bubble. Can you expand on that a little bit? Like, are all fiats bubbles by that
Yeah,
definition?
that's a very good question. So I think that the answer that all fiat money is indeed a bubble.
Mm-hmm.
So a bubble, you can think of this as consisting of two components, or the price of any financial asset, you can think of this as two components. There's like a fundamental component, and also kind of a speculative component. Now, the fundamental component of Bitcoin, the value of that, just like fiat money, is equal to 0. So that means that the value of Bitcoin is purely driven by the speculative component, and that's what I mean by a bubble.
Okay.
That's a very good question.
So recently there have been concerns that Bitcoin mining has gotten a lot more centralized because the rate required is so large. Do you think that if the sources of Bitcoin are like all centralized in the hands of a few people, it will begin to resemble like fiat currency more, or do you think that's outdated?
So I think there's always this notion of, people always want to, get together in order to, form groups. But what I think is what's different though, there's no overall underlying institution that's guiding this type of behavior. It's still, group formation is still somehow decentralized. But I do think that, it's not a coincidence that Bitcoin is so similar and shares so many features of more traditional currency ideas.
Yeah, when you look at government policy over the last 10, 15 years, there's been a very clear line to chip away at and ultimately destroy the ability to transfer significant sums of cash anonymously or to store them. I mean, every mechanism to do that has been pretty much eliminated. And with alternative currencies like e-gold and Liberty Reserve, they especially went after the people who exchanged them for fiat currency, so to get them and say, well, they're money transmission businesses and they didn't have a license, so they're going to get them. Do you think it's possible that Bitcoin will be spared? Because Bitcoin does allow you to do that, and everything about government policy indicates that the government hates that. So aren't they going to do something to stamp it out? And if they can't stamp out Bitcoin because it's decentralized, won't they criminalize buying and selling it unless you have so many licenses that you can't get that's how they're going to
Yeah, so
get it?
that, your question brings up a great issue that I didn't have a chance to really delve into. But I think a big pressing concern is the role of government in regulating, or kind of, I guess, yeah, regulating is the right word, Bitcoin. And so the question is, can Bitcoin be regulated? Given that this is, a decentralized anonymous currency. So I think that the US government especially has a big incentive to become interested and involved in Bitcoin. Now, I think current central banks, usually when I go to conferences or give talks at, the Federal Reserve banks, there is discussion about, what this means for the conduct of monetary policy and also regulation as well. So the reason why I think, the regulation of Bitcoin is not so obvious, well, I guess the types of transactions that occur with Bitcoin gives the government a natural incentive to be involved. So I do think that in the future, this is something that the government is actively thinking about. And now there's also more discussion within central banks themselves about, just what Bitcoin means for the competition within, more traditional fiat markets. But it's a really interesting question, and I don't think that we can have an immediate answer now, but I do think that regulation is one of the pressing concerns for Bitcoin.
When you are saying that Bitcoin doesn't have any intrinsic value, so as I know, intrinsic value, the word intrinsic value is kind of something like a philosophic property, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like we can argue that nothing actually have any intrinsic value unless we assign to it. And do you think, on the other hand, the extrinsic value is something that can actually generate or increase the intrinsic value of it? So do you think like Bitcoin has some sort of property that actually can generate its intrinsic value?
You should define intrinsic value as being able to produce something like a raw material in a manufacturing component helps to produce it that has intrinsic
Yeah.
value.
So let me kind of clarify on that. So why I call Bitcoin a bubble is the Bitcoin does have value, but its value is purely its liquidity. It's going to be valued because, well, you can use it for transactions, and also you think it might be more valuable in the future. Now, there's also, I guess a difference between Bitcoin and something like a stock or a bond. So if you think about a stock, its value is tied to something fundamental. It's tied to something real. It's tied to a firm. Similarly, if you think about gold, gold is not an example of a fiat currency. It's an example of a commodity money. So gold, its value, it has intrinsic value because you can always convert gold to something you do value. You can make it into jewelry. You can put it in your teeth or whatever, right? Bitcoin is, it can't be used, you can't consume it, and you can't use it to produce.
But on the other hand, can't we argue that Bitcoin is also tied to the blockchain that is stored on the internet?
Mm-hmm.
Like if someday like internet is destroyed, like no one has the copy of the blockchain at all, the Bitcoin is valueless. But as long as we have the blockchain there, that means Bitcoin is tied to something. So that blockchain actually gives the value.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting point. But so The blockchain, though, is in part of the institution itself, right? It helps, I guess it's the underlying machinery for how Bitcoin's able to circulate. But again, I don't think that the value of Bitcoin is tied to something new. It's the existence of Bitcoin. You would need the blockchain itself in order to, create more Bitcoin.
Okay, let's thank Professor Zhang again. We'll have our next talk in